This has been a historical week, seeing a former sitting president of the United States of America brought up on felony charges. Donald Trump is now facing 34 charges that harken back to his dealings with Stormy Daniels and their supposed affair, and Trump's alleged attempts to cover it up with hush money as he was running for president. Now, I'm not going to be covering more of this than that, since nothing has been put through the courts, and frankly, the world doesn't need more conjecture on his case. However, there are historical figures that have clashed with the law, including, shockingly enough, a few presidents. So while we await the outcome of Trump's case, let's take a look at a few of those, starting out with the most obvious. Now, before Trump, when someone uttered the words presidential cover-up, President Nixon was the first to come to mind. Not going to rehash too much of the story, but essentially, on June 17, 1972, the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate building were broken into. And, well, all hell broke loose.
No one has proved that the Republicans are behind the break-in, but tomorrow the Democrats are expected to file some sort of legal action against the GOP anyway.
The U.S. House Judiciary Committee started a probe, then created the U.S. Senate Watergate Committee. And through that investigation, it turned out it was Nixon who was the kingpin of that operation. And he was actively trying to cover up his involvement in the affair. And after 2 years of information being poured over and facing 3 articles of impeachment, Nixon just resigned, becoming the first president to do so in history, and that has not been repeated since. And it led to this famous line from the man himself.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Now, you might be asking, how did he avoid criminal charges if all this happened? Well, incoming president and former Vice President Gerald Ford pardoned him from any further charges. Basically, a get-out-of-jail-free card. But had that not happened, there might have been precedent for Trump's charges.
The lights are off and they must be looking for a fuse box or something, because them flashlights, they're keeping me awake.
Now, we do have another president to add to this list, but first, let's cover a politician that wears the dubious crown of being the, quote, most corrupt politician ever. And that person is William M. Boss Tweed. Now, he was running something called the TWEED ring between 1869 and 1877. And even before getting elected to Congress at the age of 30, was considered a rather prosperous crook. Now, Tweed rose to prominence in New York and became exceptionally rich through some rather basic scams, such as overbilling by contractors, patronage, and of course, the usual bribes and kickbacks. And while he was considered untouchable, he was also the target of one of the first successful hit pieces in reporting. The New York Times launched an investigation into his indiscretions in 1871, which led to hundreds of criminal charges against him. Even New York City, the city, sued him for $6 million. Sadly, though, most of the money was gone at that point, and it was more for show. In the end, William Tweed and the TWEED ring got another dubious honor, as being the political figure that stole the most money, an honor he still wears to this day. Now, in case you're wondering, he died at the age of 55 in prison. And back to another sitting president for this one. Now, Ulysses S. Grant sat in office as the 18th administration, and apparently the corruption was so thick and widespread that the term Grantism was adopted, referring back to just that. And there is a lot to wade through on this guy, but perhaps let's just look at the corruption that came closest to him. Now, dude is long dead and never had to answer for any of this, but let's just put the alleged term out there for everyone. Cool? Now, the scheme was called simply the Whiskey Ring, and it took place between 1871 and 1876. And the sole goal of this scheme was to divert tax revenues, which ended up in the pockets of government agents, politicians, distillers, and distributors. Frankly, everyone was getting rich here. And to be honest, the whole ring was started back with the Lincoln administration, but it really took off as a cartel of sorts. And it was serious business. Now, it was allegedly turned into an official ring by Grant, and millions of dollars of federal taxes were siphoned off. The ring was led by a man named John McDonald. No, not Ron, John. He was a Missouri revenue collector and actually appointed by Ulysses S. Grant himself. And according to the investigations, MacDonald coordinated with Grant's private secretary, Orville Babcock, to keep the ring hidden and to prevent it from being exposed. Of course, as the wheels fell off and the charges started piling in, Ulysses basically threw everyone under the bus with the now infamous line, "Let no guilty man escape." All the big names got swept up in the investigation except for the president himself, and in total 350 people were indicted. Though most of the people that were at the top of the ring ended up getting acquitted, including Grant's personal secretary, Orville Babcock, and John MacDonald, the de facto leader of the ring, both of which were personally vouched for by the president. So I guess make of that what you will. And finally, I do have to give props to one man who faced a lifetime in prison for his dubious dealings, though the crux of his story is how it all ended. R. Bud Dwyer was a member of the Pennsylvania State Senate from 1965 to 1971. After that, he served as the Senate Treasurer from 1981 to 1987, which is where his real story kicks off. Now, Dwyer is on this list for the very same reason as everyone else: kickbacks. There was a specific contract that apparently was accepted and overpaid in the millions, and according to the investigation, he accepted $300,000 for accepting the bid, keeping $100,000 for himself. After a long trial, Dwyer was found guilty on 11 counts of conspiracy, mail fraud, and perjury, and faced a sentence of 55 years and a $300,000 fine.
This is a sad and shocking day for me. Totally unbelievable. I'm totally innocent of all of these charges, and I don't know how this could happen.
Now, the outcry over this case wasn't just the way the story ended. We'll get to that in a bit. But the issue was these kinds of deals were rampant in politics back in the day, and it seemed like Dwyer was just the unlucky one to get busted. And it looked like he was being made an example of, and he might have been right. He protested his innocence as much as he could, even reaching out to President Reagan hoping for a presidential pardon. But it wasn't to be. So a press conference was called for January 22nd, 1987, a day before his sentencing hearings were supposed to start. It was supposed to be a resignation chat, and all the media was invited. And that morning, Dwyer showed up, claimed his innocence in front of about 20 reporters, and then began reading from a 21-page prepared speech. Then he handed out several letters to specific people. Once he finished that, he pulled a gun, offered people a chance to leave, and then proceeded to kill himself. Over the following few days, TV stations ran the footage of his death. Some decided to run up right up until he shot himself, and others took the low road and just ran it uncensored. What is messed up, though, is that it ran throughout the day, and there was a snowstorm across the region, and most of the kids were at home watching TV. In case you thought news was gratuitous now, it was brutal back then. Anyhow, this moment in history has been mentioned over the years in pop culture several times, most famously for the song "Hey Man, Nice Shot" by Filter in the 90s. Thanks for watching.